overlap between crime and substance misuse, and of course there is a strong correlation between crime, and in the modern crime prevention strategy both substance misuse in terms of alcohol and drugs, they are some of the key drivers of crime. So it is very important that as part of our joined up solution in our drug strategy, law enforcement has got a critical role to play. And we've wanted to make sure that law enforcement have all the tools that they need. So the Psychoactive Substance Act, which was brought in 2016, Mr. Speaker, has really had a very positive impact. Hundreds of retailers across the United Kingdom have closed down or are no longer selling psychoactive substances. Police have arrested suppliers, and the action by the National Crime Agency has resulted in the removal of psychoactive substances being sold by the UK-based websites. The first offenders have been jailed, and we're seeing the police using their new powers and more people going through the criminal justice system. Now, yeah.
She is kind, and yes, I would be absolutely delighted if she would care to visit Gloucester, have a look at what the Troubled Families programme by the County Council is doing. We call it Families First in Gloucester. Have a look at the Nelson Trust programme for drug rehabilitation, and perhaps also meet the Holly Gazzard Trust, who are doing a lot to educate people at schools about the dangers of murder after Holly Gazzard herself was murdered.
What honourable friend is really well illustrating is how in a local community that what is needed is a joining up of services, so the prevention in schools right the way through to the criminal justice system working well, alongside recovery working well. And of course I'll be delighted to come and visit with him to have a look at how those different services are joining up so well in Gloucestershire.
I thank the Minister for giving way generously once again. Police and law enforcement issues in my constituency has also been raised. And would the Minister be prepared to look at legislation where prolonged cannabis use is impacting on neighbours, where children and young babies next door to people who are long-term users is impacting on their daily lives?
My honourable friend makes a very important point, and what I would be prepared to do, I think, is write to her with the range of powers that already exist. I know from my own constituency that sometimes the police are not always aware of all the civil powers they've got, in addition to the criminal powers they've got, to tackle some of the antisocial behaviour that is associated with persistent drug use. So I do understand and recognise the challenge that she is portraying, but also there is the work of the Troubled Families programme, which is designed in part to look at those families where there is a drug user, somebody who has substance misuse problems, to help them, and in helping them, help the children who are living in those households.
We've already had more mentions in the first 10 minutes of the police than we've got police officers in Bassetlaw. But can she confirm that we remain the only country in the world, other than the United States, where the government lead for drugs is in criminal justice as opposed to in health? And if it's evidence-based, why is that?
Well, I'm sure there are many more police officers in Bassetlaw than there are members in this chamber this afternoon. But actually, I am proud that our drug strategy is world-leading, and it's recognised to be so because we take this cross-government approach. It is not a simple issue. Tackling substance abuse, preventing people from taking drugs is not a simple thing to do. And that's why we take this whole government joined-up approach with our friends from our colleagues from the Department of Health, are firmly involved, as are virtually every government department in our activity. And I think now, colleagues that don't mind, I'm going to make a bit more progress, because then I think I can actually answer some of the questions. OK, I'll take a few more. Yeah.
For giving way. Since the Psychoactive Substances Act, the Greater Manchester Police would argue that supply has shifted to the streets. Yeah. And actually, the product was more consistent in the head shops. Now it's constantly changing. And I wonder if you would agree with me that that part of the reason for the epidemic of spice use in Manchester, which is causing huge problems, is because of that shift.
I welcome the honourable gentleman's comment, and of course we were all really concerned when we saw those images of people on this kind of new zombie spice in Manchester. But I was really pleased that the Psychoactive Substance Act really proved itself in the case of spice, because as soon as we saw those dangers emerging, we were able to take action to ban it through the Psychoactive Substances Act. Then, as we did the testing to understand the chemical components and how serious they were, we were able to shift them into the Misuse of Drugs Acts, which gave them, proper classification. Now, only on Friday, I was pleased to see in Manchester that the whole community got together with other cities, people there from Nottingham and Wrexham, where you had law enforcement, with the mayor, with civil society, the local authorities, all coming together to do exactly what we're proposing in the drug strategy, which is a multi-agency approach. So those awful scenes that we saw of the very vulnerable homeless people in Manchester being so wickedly targeted by drug dealers of that type of spice, those issues now are being properly managed so that people who are homeless get the support that they need, so they don't fall prey to that activity. And of course, with the more stringent measures and sentencing that's available under the Misuse of Drugs Act, the police in Manchester have the full range of tools that they need to take action there. I think the gentleman behind, yeah.
The Netherlands has had a pragmatic, intelligent policy of drug decriminalisation for 50 years. They now have a serious prison problem because there aren't enough prisoners to fill their prisons. Isn't this a problem we'd like to have here?
I do very much accept that there are some members of this House and some people in our country that think what we should be doing is decriminalising drugs. I certainly do not agree with that, because we are evidence-based policymakers. All the evidence shows of the awful harms of the drugs that we ban and restrict. And it's our job, it's our primary job, is to keep people safe. And the way to keep people safe is to prevent them from taking drugs in the first place. I will.
I'm very grateful. I note the point about evidence-based, but it's clear on the evidence that the most dangerous drug in terms of harm is alcohol. So could she explain the different approach that the government takes to alcohol, the most dangerous drug, and, for example, cannabis?
Minister.
I wouldn't agree with the honourable gentleman that alcohol is the most dangerous drug. If you look at the substances which we are restricting, of course there are those people who take alcohol to such a harmful degree that it is devastating for them, and it is devastating to their family members and to the wider community. I fully accept, as we do in the modern crime prevention strategy, that misuse of alcohol does have very dramatically harmful effects and does contribute to crime. But actually, alcohol taken in moderation is not a harmful drug. And the Department of Health constantly keeps under review and is doing research all the time to understand the health impacts of alcohol and revisits what they consider to be safe drinking guidance. Public Health England has only recently updated the guidance, which suggests that people should be consuming less alcohol.
Most grateful to the Minister, who is being extremely generous to the House. Last week I visited Path to Recovery, which do the local drug recovery work in my own constituency, and they expressed some concern about the effectiveness of the drug rehabilitation requirements. They felt they didn't have enough teeth, they took up a lot of staff time and weren't very effective. Now, I note in the strategy on page 23, the government is evaluating the framework pilots, and I wonder if the Minister might say anything about her thinking on the current effectiveness of drug rehabilitation requirements and whether we can do anything different or better.
Grateful to my honourable friend for that question. Somebody I know who takes a